Hi friends. So in my last video, we talked about what a personal narrative is, but today we're going to be discussing it in more detail. So what I want you to do is pause this video and watch the story Fireflies below. And I'm actually making a personal connection because I could write a personal narrative about the first time I saw fireflies. And I'll tell you about that in just a minute, but I want you to hit pause and watch the story Fireflies and just kind of think about what a personal narrative is while you're watching. Okay, now that you've watched the story Fireflies, I kind of want to get into exactly what a personal narrative is. And I have included a document about the specific rules of a personal narrative, but I'm going to read them off to you right now. So, how do you write a personal narrative? First, you write about yourself. Second, the emphasis should be on something that you have experienced personally. Third, write about a small moment. Don't try and write about this huge, big thing. Like, I wouldn't write a story about my whole entire wedding. I would maybe pick a tiny moment from my wedding and write a story about that. Next, tell the story from your point of view. So you're going to be writing the story as if you're telling it to somebody else. Make sure that your narrative has a beginning, a middle, and an end so that it's a complete story. Don't forget about spelling and capitalization, and that'll happen at the very end when we're kind of doing our editing process, but that's part of it. And then finally, make it interesting. So, something you would want to read. You have to think to yourself, is this something I would want to read about? Um, I came up with some ideas that I wanted to tell you guys about. Looking at my heart map from the last lesson, I was thinking about a time when my brother and I, you guys can probably relate to this. You can make a connection if this has happened to you. But my brother and I were in the back seat of the car and we weren't really fighting, but it probably to our parents it sounded like fighting. We were like pestering each other and it was like, "Mom, Donnie won't stop poking me." And Donnie was like, "Dad, Rachel won't stop touching my face. She won't leave me alone." And we were just in the back seat making noise and arguing. And we happened to be on our way to like a family picnic or like a family reunion, something like that, where like my cousins and aunts and uncles were going to be. And it was at a park. I remember that. So we were in the back seat. My dad was driving, and maybe your parents have made this threat before, but he said, "If you guys don't stop, I'm going to stop the car and make you guys walk." And we didn't really believe him. We didn't take it seriously. So we just continued on what we were doing before, just kind of arguing and bickering and being loud and obnoxious. And finally, my dad pulled the car over and he was like, "All right, you guys can get out and walk." And we kind of like looked at each other and we're like, okay. So we got out of the car and we're like walking down the sidewalk and we're kind of like laughing about it. Like, I can't believe Dad just did that to us. He kicked us out of the car. And we're watching the car drive further and further away, and then it stops. The car stopped and he flipped around and he started to come back, and we were like, "Oh, he just did that to scare us. He's going to pick us up." And he pulled up next to us and he rolled down the window and he said, "Okay, you're going to walk up to that. Once you get to the corner, you're going to make a left. And then once you get to the big building on the right, the blue building, you'll turn right at that building. And then the park is just across the street." And he drove off. And we were like, "What just happened?" So he actually made us walk, and it was so funny and crazy, but that's my dad, I guess. I don't know. So I was reminded of that story. And then another story I thought about was the time that I saw fireflies in Nashville. I was staying at an Airbnb, and it was like the coolest Airbnb, you guys. It was a little tiny blue bus or like a school bus. It was a miniature school bus that had been converted into like a trailer, I guess, because there was like a bed and a little tiny, tiny kitchen, a little tiny, tiny bathroom that you could use. And we had to go inside the person's house to take showers, but the bus was just in her backyard and we slept back there, and there was like a heater and an air conditioning unit in case we needed, but we didn't actually need it. So anyway, I got to Nashville. I flew separate from my husband, and I was there in the bus waiting for him, and he was like at a conference. He was off somewhere. So I had called my mom on the phone, and I was just kind of talking to her about my flight and how I took an Uber to get to the Airbnb, and I was just waiting for my husband. And I was looking out the window, and I saw, for the first time ever in my life, I saw fireflies. And it was like such a cool moment because, I mean, as many of you know, in Utah, we don't have those bugs. And so it was just a really, really cool experience to see them as I was just kind of sitting alone on the phone with my mom in a bus in someone's backyard. And then the third story I wanted to tell you about was a time, well, it happened just recently. We're all experiencing this quarantine together, and I in my story map wrote about my mom's cooking or my mom's baking. And I thought about this just now, but my mom just the other day left cookies on our front porch, and it was like the sweetest gesture. It meant so much to me. And so I decided to write about that. And I want all of you to pick one of the things from your heart map and stretch it out into a story that you would maybe tell me about, or tell your best friend, or tell your parents about, but I want you to do it in writing. So anything that comes to your mind, it doesn't matter how the story starts or how it ends, but I want you to take 15 minutes. So set a timer for 15 minutes and just write about that thing. It was hard for me at first. I set the timer and I was like, do I start like once upon a time? Like I didn't really think, I tried not to think too much about it, but I just started writing, and I wrote for a whole 15 minutes, and it's not a perfect story, and it might not even be the story that I decide to turn into a book, but it is something that I have down on paper. So whatever you write about, you might decide at the end of this writing unit that you want to make that into a book, or you might go with something entirely different. So I'm going to close this by reading what I wrote to you, or wrote about, and then I want you to write for 15 minutes. And your parents can do this activity too, because I found this to be like very therapeutic for me. So I'm going to read what I have written. Like I said, it's not a finished story, but this is what I wrote about my mom. And I'll try really hard not to get emotional because it's an emotional time. So this is what I have so far. Oh, and I used my writing notebook. I just went to the next blank page, okay? And I started writing. It says, because of coronavirus, the whole world was quarantined and practicing social distancing. I had been stuck inside my house for over a week, and I was really missing the outside world. In fact, the whole morning I was feeling pretty sad and alone. I was sitting in my living room. It's just me, guys. I can't help myself. I was sitting in my living room watching Netflix with my husband when through the window I saw my nephew Silas run up to the front door. By the time I opened the door, he had already run back to my mom's car. I stepped out on my front porch and saw 2 containers of chocolate chip applesauce cookies, one with nuts and one without, because my husband is allergic. My mom and I talked for a little while. Her in her car and me on my front porch. It was really good to see her face. After a few minutes, sorry guys, I should just like record a whole new video, but I know I'll just cry in the next one too. So, her in her car and me on my front porch. It was really good to see her face. After a few minutes, she drove away and I went back inside. It then hit me that all I wanted to do was give her a big hug, but I couldn't because of the virus. And that's all I have so far. There's not really, it doesn't quite follow the rules of a personal narrative. I mean, it's not a complete story. It doesn't have an end or a good introduction or anything like that, but it's a start. And so I want you, like I said, to write for 15 whole minutes. And don't worry about spelling. It doesn't have to be perfect. I want you to just write. Okay, keep that momentum up. Whatever comes to your mind, I want you to write about it. Okay? All right. Thanks for watching. Tune into the next video in a couple days.